Hello everyone, my name is Harshmeet Singh and I welcome you all to the next chapter of Class 11th Economics NCERT. This is chapter number 7. Now if you look at the topic that is the chapter number 7 has, that is environment and sustainable development, you may think that why is it being fit into economics? Isn't it a chapter that we should read in environment or maybe geography? But NCERT class 11th does have this chapter in economics as well. That also tells us how our environment, the surroundings around us, are an integral part of economics and how any economy functions. In this chapter, we will be discussing a lot about the environmental issues that we have been facing as a country for the past few decades. What are the initiatives the government can take or has taken in the past, and where do we stand after all those initiatives that have been taken place? So let's begin without any further delay. Now the word environment, especially as I said, talks a lot about how exactly are we living along with the nature that surrounds us. Now the nature that surrounds us has a very important part to play in our life. A lot of us are dependent for our livelihood on the nature that is around us. Think about, for example, the fishermen. The fishermen whose entire employment is dependent upon how many fish and other sea products do they catch. Think about the farmers who are dependent upon the productivity of their soil, who are dependent on all the natural factors that surround them. And not just the farmers, for us, the food that we consume, all of that has a major impact of the environment. On top of that, in our economics syllabus, agriculture is an integral part. This is where it also has an overlap with the environment. So with all that in mind, whenever the government makes any economic policies, environment is a key part of all those policies. And that is why the NCERT also has mentioned environment here. So let's start with a very basic idea. I'm sure since your school time, you have been reading a lot about environment, environmental conservation, what is it that the government should do or has done in the past in order to safeguard the environment around us. And something similar is seen here in this chapter as well. Let's start with what comprises the environment or what are the different components of environment. So broadly speaking, you can divide the components of environment into two parts. These are biotic and abiotic elements. Not very difficult to understand. Biotic elements means the ones that are living organisms, and you can include forest, grassland, aquatic life as we were discussing. And then there are a bunch of abiotic elements that do not have life, that is water, air, soil, minerals, etc. All of that together makes up what we call as environment. And the government's focus, when they say that we want to protect the environment, we want to preserve the environment, the focus is on all of these things and not just one of them. Like for forests, the government has been trying to improve our forest cover consistently. The National Forest Policy talks about the fact that we should have a forest cover of at least 33% in the country. The reality being that we are far, far behind that, but an example of what the government is doing. For aquatic life, the government has been trying to make fishing much more sustainable. They have banned the use of trawlers, for example. Then for air and water, the government has formed pollution boards such as the CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board. We also have soil and minerals, for which the government has started multiple schemes such as the Soil Health Card Scheme. All these are different components of environment which demand attention from the government side, and where government has been trying to improve their situation bit by bit. Let's see what are the important roles that environment plays in our life and why is it so important for us. The first, the very basic one, the life support system. Now, I assume most of you have passed out your school, many of you are in college, some of you might even have passed from college, so I don't need to reiterate the importance of environment. I do not need to tell you how important is it, because environment gives us oxygen. Environment gives us every single thing that we are dependent on. See, there are two types of things that you need in your life. One is essential for your survival and other one is desirable. Having a car, having a big house, having a swimming pool, going on a vacation, these are desirable, these are not necessary. On the other hand, there are certain things that are necessary, without which your life cannot exist. So when it comes to necessary part, this is where environment plays an extremely, extremely important role. The food that you consume, the air that you breathe, everything around you, the rain that is required to grow your food, all that comes from the environment. Then environment also provides us the raw material necessary for economic growth. Imagine, can you build gold artificially? Can you build, let's say, lithium or cobalt or all these materials that are right now so important for our economic point of view? Can you build these artificially? No. These are built by nature. And that is why around the world, we see the countries pushing people away from consumption of coal, away from consumption of oil. Because all of these are limited resources. These are not resources that are available to us in unlimited quantity. Because these are natural, these are made by the environment. We are not creating it. This is not an artificial resource. So all the raw materials that you require for your necessary growth, it is all because of this. In history, you might have read about how India actually provided all the materials to England for their industrial revolution. In world history, when you read about industrial revolution, there is a very important topic where you read about why it started in UK. Why not in some other country? And then you realize it started in UK because they had the colonies who could supply them with all the raw materials that is required. So that is something that environment has given us, all the raw material that we require for our own economic progress. Then waste assimilation, that again is a very important part. India, by the virtue of having such a huge population, struggles with this aspect where we produce a lot of waste. As more and more population is going into urban areas, as our way of living is changing, we are becoming much more consumeristic, consuming much more than what we used to do earlier. The waste production is also increasing considerably. We are producing much more waste now than what we used to do earlier. Sadly enough, our waste processing capacity is not very high. This is where we need nature to do its job. Why is it that we say that you should use biodecomposable products? Because these are decomposable in nature itself. That is where the nature, that is environment, helps us. It helps us process and decompose a lot of waste to ensure that it does not harm us in the long run. It also helps us with biodiversity. Having a diverse set of genes, having a diverse set of resources around us makes our life much more enriched. And it has obviously an aesthetic and cultural value. Aesthetic value as in, why is it that people travel so far away just to see a mountain, just to see let's say waterfall? All these are natural things. They are not adding anything to your life. But you want to see them, you travel far away just to see those kind of attractions. This is where environment or nature adds an aesthetic value as well. Aesthetic value to what you already have. This is not something that is man-made. This is all with the help of environment. So in all these aspects, environment plays such a huge role in the life that we have around us. Having said that, although environment being so important, so critical for us, there is a lot of crisis which environment is facing right now. And this is not just a fight that India is fighting. It's a fight where multiple countries are actually joining their hands together to see if we are able to find a solution in the long run. Let's see what are some of the important crises that the environment is facing. First, the most important one, rapid resource depletion. This is mainly seen in two aspects. One, you will see a large-scale deforestation. As the global population increases, the countries feel more and more pressured to cut down trees to have a level area where they can have more buildings, they can, let's say, make more factories, they can build more houses so that they can accommodate a larger population. That leads to cutting down of forests in large numbers. You might have remembered a few years back there was this huge fire in the Amazon rainforest. Amazon rainforest that expands into multiple countries. It was mainly Brazil which saw large-scale forest fire of wildfire. And one of the criticism of Brazilian government was that they were not doing enough to stop the fire. There were many statements from the government of Brazil saying that we are not trying enough because a lot of our area is just occupied by forest, and if some of the forest is cut or destroyed, it would actually help us in expanding our factories, in expanding the buildings that we have, in expanding the space where we can accommodate more people. So cutting down a forest is something that is done intentionally in many areas. So we are depleting these resources. Not just this, take one other very interesting example. Take an example of, let's say, Saudi Arabia. Such a long time, Saudi Arabia has been earning most of their revenue by selling oil and gas. A bulk of the revenue of their government comes just from oil and gas. Look at UAE. In UAE, you do not have any income tax. The government says we don't need income tax. We earn so much money from selling our oil and gas. They also realize, however, that the supply of oil and gas is not unlimited. The speed at which it is being consumed, it will be depleted sooner rather than later. So what is Saudi Arabia doing? If you realize, they are trying to diversify their economy. They are trying to put a lot of money into robotics, AI, other kind of industries. They are building football leagues there. They have invested into IPL. A lot of this money is flowing because they realize that the material resources they have, on the back of which they have built all their economy, their income, might not be long lasting. Increasingly, we see a lot of land being converted into desert. Many of the world's biggest deserts that you see today used to be green areas covered with forest. And now those have turned into desert. This is called desertification. That also is an example of how, if we don't take care of nature, that will eventually change its shape and form into something which is extremely harmful for us. Over extraction is a big problem, as I said, for fossil fuels, for minerals. You are extracting the earth, you are disturbing the natural process, the natural equilibrium that has been set up. There are also issues of non-renewable consumption. All these things, oil, gas, coal, are non-renewable in nature. The speed at which it is being consumed is much higher than the speed at which it is produced. Coal or coal production in nature takes hundreds and thousands of years. So it is not that coal cannot be formed in the future. Coal will be formed in the future by nature itself, but it requires hundreds and thousands of years. But the speed at which we are consuming coal, we will end up coal very soon in our supply. There are also problems of groundwater depletion, especially, it's a big problem, especially with India. A lot of big cities around the world are running out of water. You know, a few years back, Cape Town in South Africa became the first major global city to run out of water. And don't even look outside, look in India. A few years back, Chennai faced this situation where they almost ran out of water. So much so that the Tamil Nadu government announced that everyone in Chennai should work from home, they should not come to offices because offices did not have any water. We see such kind of situation emerging in Maharashtra, where trains are run just to supply water into places where there is not enough water. Niti Aayog report says that in the next few years, a lot of big Indian cities will run out of groundwater. All this is because we are exploiting too much water. A lot of water is being used in agriculture, crops that consume a lot of water, sugarcane. Rice also consumes significant amount of water. These are grown in large numbers in India. Even if we are just exporting them, we are growing them using our own water. That is a big problem. And again, if you are thinking, we have so much ocean water around us, what is the problem with water? The problem is with the availability of fresh water. Over 99% of the world's water is not potable, it's not fresh water, it's all frozen in the polar regions. Out of the fresh water that we have, most of it is just in the form of groundwater. And that is being depleted at a very fast pace, much faster as compared to the rate at which the water is being refilled there again. On top of that, the problem is as more and more urbanization takes place, as you're building more concrete, more roads, the water absorption that used to happen when there was rain, a lot of water would be absorbed from the ground, it would fill up the underground water resource. That is not happening now. A lot of water is just being drained out, it's resulting into floods, it's resulting into water running off, and the groundwater depletion is actually accentuating at even faster pace. All these are big problems that are leading to the world going towards a very, very dangerous future. Apart from this, there has also been a problem of biodiversity decline. Every few years, you see many species being extinct. There are reports that come out from international organizations about which species are critically endangered and which species have already gone extinct. That is leading to a loss of biodiversity. There is habitat destruction. I gave you an example of Amazon rainforest in Brazil, where a lot of the critics say that the government itself wanted to destroy a big part of the forest so that they could use that area for urbanization, for building more human settlements. That is leading to habitat destruction. There's also a problem of invasive species. Now, what's an invasive species? Invasive species is a species that does not originally belong to that area. A species that has entered that area from some other area, either by mistake or intentionally. The problem is when they come into a new area, they disrupt the cycle, the chain in that area. They might start eating one of the species there. That leads to declining population. They might disrupt the entire food chain in that area. So having an invasive species coming from outside, that becomes a big, big, big issue. There's also a problem of overexploitation, as I said earlier. A big example of that is seen in the fishing sector. India exports considerable amount of seafood around the world. Frozen shrimp, for example, especially is a big export commodity from India. Because India has a large coastline, we also have multiple inland rivers. Fishing is a very productive activity. But the problem is when you use unsustainable means of fishing, when you use huge trawlers that have humongous nets, you are catching fish of very small size as well, and you are actually disrupting their life cycle. Even when you are fishing, it has to be under certain limited numbers. If you fish too much, you extract all the fish out of the water, then there is no fish left to continue that cycle of reproduction. And that is a big problem that India and many other countries are facing. There's also a problem of ecosystem impact. We have seen in multiple countries issues of floods, drought, there is erratic monsoon that we are seeing in India itself. The pattern of monsoon, the monsoon rains increase or decrease year on year without giving any kind of a warning signal. It has led to declining production in agriculture and in fishery production as well. There are proven studies that have now shown that any change in the monsoon pattern has an impact on the number of fish being caught in Bay of Bengal. So when you disrupt this cycle, when you are kind of interfering with the environment, it will have an impact on multiple other sectors in the life, multiple other sectors in the economy. And this is where we have to be extremely, extremely careful about this. What are the reasons? Why is it that we are leading to this particular problem? A big part of the reason is the greenhouse gas emission. I'm sure all of you have read about the greenhouse gas effect and how does it happen. We don't need to explain that, but the problem is the greenhouse gas emission is increasing at a very, very, very rapid pace. There are multiple reasons behind it. The first one being the fossil fuel combustion. Yes, the world is moving towards technology such as electric cars, solar panels, but the reality is despite all of that, we still have a situation where most of the world is still dependent upon fossil fuel as a major source of energy. Look at India. You would have heard a lot about India's solar power expansion, which is true. India, for example, aims to reach 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. That is our goal. That from renewable resources, we should be able to manufacture 500 gigawatts of energy by 2030. Where are we right now? So by the end of financial year 25, government crossed 200 gigawatts mark. So for example, by 31st March 2025, government has crossed this mark, but we are still far away from here. Now in renewable energy also, if you look at just the renewable energy part, almost half of it comes from solar. Solar is a big component here which has been working pretty well for India. Now you might assume that because we are doing so well in solar, everything is looking great, maybe we are now not using as much coal, but that is not true. Over half of India's energy still comes only from coal. Do you know that? Over half of energy still comes only from coal. And that is why whenever in a global summit, there are discussions about phasing out of coal or not using coal, India always stands against that. Because we know that our economy is still heavily dependent upon the use of coal. And coal is such a fossil fuel that makes sure that there is a lot of emission of greenhouse gases, and we can't help it. We are reducing it gently, we are reducing it gradually, we are putting a lot more focus on solar, wind, etc. But again, coal still remains a very heavy part of our energy portfolio, leading to the problem of greenhouse gas emission. Industrial activities, again, that doesn't need any explanation. Around the world, there is a big debate between developing and the developed world. The developed world, US, UK, Germany, etc., they want all the countries to cut down their industries. They want China, India, every country, Brazil, to cut down their industries, to stop most of their industries. India says, or developing countries say, that now it is our chance to grow. If you look at how global warming has started, it is because of what the developed countries have been doing for the last 200 years. You have become rich, you have become industrialized on the basis of what you have done. And now when it is our turn to grow, when it is our turn to have better production, to give better quality of life to our citizens, now you want us to stop agriculture or industrial production. No, that will not happen. So that also is a part of the problem. Then melting ice caps. Not just Antarctic, but Arctic as well. The ice caps in Arctic and Atlantic, it is the polar regions, are melting at a much faster pace as compared to earlier. When the ice caps melt at a faster pace, the result is that the global sea level, that is, the level of water in the seas will increase. When the ice melts, obviously it will turn into water, it will increase the sea level, and that creates a big problem. There are two big problems to that. One problem, it will increase the sea level, so the low-lying nations, especially the island nations, will get submerged. There are news reports about how cities such as Venice, Bangkok will all be submerged in the coming few decades. You have seen countries like Indonesia changing their capital because they know that their capital cities will be submerged underwater because of increasing level of water. But there is one more aspect of this ice cap melting that we usually ignore. These ice caps that we have in the polar regions have trapped a lot of greenhouse gases inside of them. As these ice melts, all that trapped greenhouse will be emitted into the atmosphere. When it gets emitted into the atmosphere, it will harm us even more. That becomes an even bigger problem. So not just does it lead to increasing level of water in the sea, it also leads to a lot of greenhouse gases being sent into the atmosphere. Then there's a problem of agricultural impact. Because of all these greenhouse gases, the productivity of agricultural crops has been declining in multiple countries, including in India. Because of greenhouse gases, the average temperature increases, and there are many crops that are very sensitive to the temperature range that they require. If you increase the temperature ever so slightly, the productivity of the crop will be harmed significantly. So it may lead to a problem where people don't have enough food, where food security becomes a big issue. There are also issues of rising temperature, as I said, leading to extreme weather events. Just a couple of years back, you saw these humongous floods in Pakistan that caused them a damage of billions and billions of dollars. A lot of it was because of this climate change. And deforestation. Deforestation harms us in multiple ways. Forest acts as a place for carbon capture, for carbon sequestration. The trees capture carbon in large numbers. They don't allow them to be free in the atmosphere. When the trees are not present in large numbers, all that harmful greenhouse gas will be freely movable in the atmosphere. That is when it harms us even more. So greenhouse gas emissions specifically has a lot of these problems attached to it. On the other hand, if you look at the current status, as I told you in the beginning, India envisaged that we should have 33% of the country as forest cover, but we are lagging far, far, far behind. If you look at India's total forest cover at present, it's about 25.17%, way below the target that we had set for ourselves. This target, by the way, was set in 1988 National Forest Policy. And the very interesting part is, this target was to be achieved in the first decade of 21st century. So the deadline has gone past about 20 years back, and we still are nowhere close to the target. There are various reasons for that, obviously: growing population, growing urbanization, the need to expand your industrial base, the need to have more area for mining of minerals, the need to have more area for extracting mineral resources. All of that means that you would be cutting down forest. That is the easiest way to do that. You do this simple experiment. If you live in especially cities, you would understand this. Imagine when you were a kid and how many birds you used to hear chirping nearby your city. Especially if you live near a garden, if you live near a park, how many birds you used to see chirping in the evening or in the morning. And compare that to what is happening now. How many birds do you hear chirping? Sparrows that used to be so often seen when you were kids, you can't see them now. I'm not saying they have become extinct, but their population has dwindled significantly. If you remember when you were kids, you would, and again try and imagine how many community parks or open parks or grounds you used to have to play around your city. And now imagine how many parks are left for you to go and enjoy and have a good time. Imagine that. All that is an indication of where the forest cover is declining. All that proves how the forest cover is just not up to the mark. If you look at the impact that pollution has had, India is again oblivious, or it is not oblivion to the impact of pollution. So much so that whenever there is a global list of the most polluted cities in the world, unfortunately most of the cities on that list are Indian cities. We all know the situation created in Delhi and nearby areas in October, November, especially in terms of air pollution. We have issues of water, health effect, environmental impact. All of these are directly related to the levels of pollution in the country. There are reports that suggest that living in Delhi is equivalent to smoking multiple cigarettes in a day. Even though you might not be consuming anything, but just by the impact of passive smoking, there is so much pollution in the national capital that it would have a similar impact on your lungs as consuming multiple cigarettes would have. Water pollution means that there is much lesser clean water available for you to consume. And interestingly, a lot of very bad diseases are all connected to contaminated water. Bad water, dirty water, contaminated water is a very, very easy and common source for catching a lot of these diseases. And this is where it has to be curtailed. There are multiple negative health effects that we have seen because of poor pollution and poor air quality around us. We have reached a situation where schools have to be shut down for a few days when the pollution level goes above a certain limit. There are hardly any days when our AQI levels in most of Indian cities is at satisfactory level. It is either poor or is it severe. We very seldom do we even see that we have come down from the level of poor, and that is a big problem that we always face. And all that is something that can be corrected, that has to be corrected in the long term. These are all the consequences of deforestation. First, it obviously has a problem with agriculture. The agriculture productivity reduces. You have lesser production, you have lesser output when you have lesser forest cover. It is done because of urbanization, more and more people coming in. Imagine this. You have seen an increasing trend of people not having enough jobs in rural areas. Because of it, they have to shift to the cities. When you have so many people shifting to the cities and you don't have enough space to settle them, you don't have enough houses to settle them, you will have to build houses, and that is why you have to cut down all these forests. There are issues of commercial exploitation when companies are interested in getting a piece of land where they think that there are a lot of mineral reserves available. There are also issues of industrialization, because of which there is a lot of demand for land. Now, it's not that government doesn't do anything. I'm sure all of you have read about something called Campa Fund. Just to explain with an example, let's say there's a big company that wants a piece of land for setting up an industry, and that piece of land has forest cover right now. So they first have to cut the forest, and then they would have to, or they can set up their factory. Now, what the government tells them is that you have to do two things. First, let's say if you're cutting down 5,000 or 50,000 trees, then you have to plant the same number of trees somewhere else. First of all, that is one thing that you have to do. So how many trees are cutting down? You have to plant the same number of trees or even more somewhere else. Now, there is a problem with that, because see, old trees are much more useful. They have much better impact on the environment as compared to just having new trees. But apart from that, the companies also have to submit a significant amount of sum to a government fund called Campa. So Campa is this compensatory afforestation fund, where the companies, the industry would have to submit money. It's a kind of a fine or a punishment kind of a thing where they have given money. Now, Campa fund is to be utilized by the center and the state governments, and this fund specifically has to be used for environmental activities, for helping the environment. It can be done in many ways, to increase forest cover, to run better government schemes, etc. The problem is, however, there are multiple reports that indicate that a lot of fund in this Campa is just lying vacant, lying unused. There is significant amount of money which has been deposited in the Campa fund, but the government has not been making good use of that. That is also a big problem. You make policies which are good, but then just making good policies on paper will not give you the impact that you are hoping for unless you actually implement them in a manner that is warranted. And that is a big gap that we are seeing. Thousands of crores of rupees are lying in the Campa fund unused. And the same is the situation with a lot of cess. The government, as you know, collects a lot of cess. Cess is a tax on tax collected for a specific purpose. Let's say education cess is collected, so that money will only be used for education. Krishi Kalyan cess, if that is collected, only can be used for agricultural activities. Similarly, the government has collected significant amount of cess for environmental activities as well, which is lying unused and vacant. That is a big red mark or red question mark that the government has to look into. Now, one other big problem that we have been facing, and I told you earlier, is water. It is a very, very, very dangerous and a crisis that needs urgent attention. There are so many reports from Niti Aayog and other institutes where they point out towards the depleting groundwater in India. A part of it is because of over-exploitation in terms of agriculture. Farmers in most parts of the country, for example, do not have to pay water bills. In most parts of the country, they would not even have to pay electricity bill. So they extract a lot of water using tube wells from the ground, and that becomes a big problem. There's over extraction. You have seen a lot of fields flooding with water even though they might not need it. And take a very simple example of rice. India is one of the largest exporters of rice in the world. Now the problem with exporting rice is, rice, when you grow it, demands a lot of water. So you extracted water from your ground to grow rice. And then the same rice you exported. So essentially when I as a country am exporting rice to some other country, I'm not just giving them rice, I'm giving them my own groundwater. Try and understand this. The groundwater that I extracted to grow rice, then I'm selling it away. That is a big problem. There's also poor management. You know, a lot of water in India, you might be surprised to know, gets wasted just because of leaky pipes. And I'm not talking about the leaky pipes within your household. I'm talking about the pipes that the government, the municipality has to manage, or they are the ones who have actually set up across the city. How is it that you get water in your society, in your locality from the central authority with the thousands and lakhs of kilometers of pipes that have been laid down around the country? A lot of them are very poor, old conditioned, because of which they are leaking. Many of them, you will be surprised to know, are pipes installed from the time of the British era. Imagine that. And those pipes obviously need a lot of maintenance. Because of their leakage, we are losing out on a considerable amount of water. There's also a problem of climate change, because of which a lot of these lakes and ponds have dried up. And there's also over exploitation. For example, take an example of Bengaluru, called the city of lakes, or rather called the city of lakes earlier. A lot of buildings, a lot of big infrastructure projects in Bengaluru are now built in an area where there used to be a lake. You will now see very few handful of lakes now existing in Bengaluru, because all the others have been just filled up, and what you are doing is you are building a building over them. Why is it so important? Because those lakes were very important as a source of water deposit. So when there were a lot of rivers, the water used to collect in that, the water used to seep through that as well. Now you have covered that area, and now there is no way for the water to get collected or to get stored. All that water gets wasted, it just gets thrown away. That is a huge issue that we have, because of which the problem of water resource or water extraction is going deeper and deeper. One other part of this problem that we tend to ignore is the problem of ocean acidification. In simple terms, the decreasing pH levels of the ocean. As more and more industrial waste goes into the ocean, as more and more pollution goes into the ocean, it is leading to ocean acidification. The reasons are industrial emission, increased CO2, and increased CO2 absorption. Since it is acidic in nature, it is leading to the entire water getting acidic, reducing the population of fish. It's also impacting the marine life, leading to coral bleaching. Corals are such an important part of not just tourism but also industry. A lot of important skincare products, etc., require these kind of inputs, which because of coral bleaching are being hurt immensely. Then there are issues of shellfish decline, all because of the changing pH level of the ocean water. The ocean temperatures are rising considerably on an average. The chemical reaction in the water, the pH level, all of these mean that you have disrupted the ecosystem of the oceans. And it's important because a large part of our population, not just in India, but in many parts of the world, including in island countries, a large part of our population, for their livelihood, is dependent on the ocean. And when you disrupt that marine population, you are actually impacting it negatively for the long run. Not just this, It also has an impact on nutrition, especially in the coastal communities. For their nutritional needs, people are dependent on fishing and related activities. And when you tell them that either you are not able to catch enough fish or the fish itself is poisonous now, you are actually giving them, or you're actually endangering their nutritional security. There are also aspects of ecosystem imbalance, reduced yields of the fish. As I said, less and less fish are being caught, and it has been leading to loss of habitat. You know, you can take an example, let's say in India as well. Let's take an example of the Ganga River. When the Ganga River starts, for example, it is a pretty clean, pristine river. But as it now starts to go through different cities and towns, the color starts to change. It starts to go more brown and black in color. Why is that? Take an example of Kanpur. Kanpur, for example, is a city in UP that is famous for a lot of leather producing industry, leather manufacturing, leather processing plants. Kanpur, for example, has many of these industries where the water or the industrial output that flows out of these industries is directly then mixed with the river water in Ganga. As per the rules, it has to be processed first, and only after all the pollutants and dirt has been taken out of it, all the chemicals have been taken out of it, then it should be merged. The remaining water should be merged with the river. But that is not what happens. Industries don't want to put their money into it because it's not helping them financially. It's an impact on their earning. They don't have an incentive for this. The government and the Supreme Court has intervened multiple times. The Supreme Court has talked about polluter pays principle, how the industry or the entity that pollutes will be the one that will be paying for cleaning it up. But even then, we have not seen any of this policy having the kind of impact that the government or the Supreme Court would have hoped for. All this is a problem that is only increasing and magnifying as the time goes ahead. Now, government, as I said, has taken multiple initiatives. It's not that we have not done anything. There is a Green India mission that the government has started. It is a part of National Action Plan on Climate Change. It has led to a very slight increase. It has led to an increase in forest cover by 0.56%. But again, we are far behind our forest cover target of 33%. We also have the National Agroforestry Policy and trees outside forests in India. Means the government says that what matters is more trees, not where they are. So even if people are planting trees outside the forest, government will still count that as a forest area. So let's say you have your own personal land, 2 or 3 acres of land, where you have planted mango trees or you have planted some other trees for commercial purposes. The government encourages that as well. That will not be called as a forest, but it will be counted in the forest cover. The difference is when the government calls an area as a forest, then there are restrictions on you that you cannot cut down the tree, you cannot use resources from here, so on and so forth. It's your personal property, you can do that, but the government still says that we'll encourage you and we'll count it as a forest cover. There's community-based afforestation. The government has realized that unless the entire community, especially in the rural areas, comes together and participates in afforestation, participates in helping the environment, unless that happens, it is almost impossible for this kind of an initiative to become successful. You know, almost every successful environment initiative in India's history, think about, let's say, Chipko movement. Almost every successful environmental movement in history has one thing in common. That is, the communities living nearby that area have participated in that. They believe it is for their good, they believe it is in their interest, and they led these initiatives. And that is how they became successful. Chipko movement is just one example of it. The Silent Valley movement in Kerala is again an example of this. In all of these, community participation has led to the success of it. So the government has been pushing community participation for afforestation as well. Now, whenever there is any discussion about environment and the negative impacts of environment, no such discussion can be complete without having discussion on global warming. The idea is simple, that the average temperature of Earth has been increasing. And what is the problem with that? The first problem, the melting of ice caps, that will increase the sea level. Then the problem of negative impact on agricultural output. Crops that require a certain specific range of temperature, they will go bad. It also impacts common life, people who especially work outdoors. All these are big problems. Now, you would have seen so many of the government initiatives, including multilateral initiatives, where the countries have tried to reduce or have tried to curtail the increasing temperature of the earth. And you will keep on hearing this term time and time again, that the countries don't want the temperature to increase by more than 2 degrees Celsius. This 2 degrees Celsius number is something that you keep on hearing time and time again. Now, what is the 2 degrees Celsius thing, and 2 degrees as compared to what? For example, when I say that I will get 20 more marks, then your question should be 20 more than what? What is the base, right? So when you say in global warming, the countries are trying that the pollution or the average temperature of the earth should not go beyond 2 degrees as compared to pre-industrial revolution era. So there is wide scale acceptance around the world, every country accepts this, that the temperature around the world or temperature of the earth started to rise with industrial revolution. Industrial revolution was the one major factor that pushed the earth's temperature. So we are taking that as a base, and beyond that it should not go 2 degrees Celsius. The bad news is it is very close, it will go beyond 2 degrees Celsius anyways. The countries are just not doing enough. There are no binding targets that the countries have on them. Every country is happy and free to decide whatever their own targets are. For example, India, as you know, has decided that we will achieve net zero by 2070. Similarly, for example, countries such as China has said we'll achieve it by 2060. But these are not binding goals or agreements. So if a country does not achieve that, there's nothing that you can do about that. Because of which global warming has become a big problem. There are multiple reasons for global warming around the world. First big reason, the greenhouse gas emission, as we discussed earlier as well. The emission of greenhouse gases because of various sources. And on top of that, the problem that you're cutting down the forest. So the one thing that could reduce greenhouse gases, or the one thing that has the ability to absorb those gases, you're cutting it down. So one, you are increasing the production, and secondly, you're also cutting down your own ability to absorb those gases. So it's a double whammy. You are hurting yourself from both the ends. Then there's a problem of agricultural practice. Now what we don't realize is a lot of farming activities, especially having livestock, creates a lot of methane. I'll give you an example. The orthodox technique of cultivating rice demands that the rice saplings that you have when you plant them, they have to be submerged under water for a long time. That creates methane. Lot of livestock that you have, cows, buffaloes, etc. When they burp, methane actually comes out. In their excreta also is a lot of methane that comes out. So agriculture, livestock activities, allied agriculture activities actually lead to methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And obviously you cannot ignore the industrial part of it. A lot of industries, the output that they have, the factor that, the gases that they emit, a lot of it actually is constituted by greenhouse gases. The vehicular pollution adds to the problem even more. You would have seen when the pollution levels go very high, we have seen this in Delhi, for example, schemes such as even odds have been started, where on even days, even numbered cars or vehicles will be allowed. On odd days, odd numbers vehicles will be allowed. So vehicular pollution also adds to it. All these are small factors that keep on getting added and creates a big problem of what we call as a greenhouse gas emission, because of which global warming has become a big issue. Around the world, you have seen erratic monsoon. You would have seen that with every passing year, the maximum temperature that you would have seen the last year gets broken. Almost every single year now is the hottest year on record. Every next year becomes hotter than the last one. That is a huge issue that we are facing. Then, what exactly is the effective solution? If we have discussed about the problem, there has to be a solution as well. Now, rather than suggesting you something out of the blue, the issue is the solution is simple, straightforward. The same thing that you would have studied in school, the same thing that you would have studied as a kid, that is the solution. First, focus on renewables. For example, focus on solar, focus on wind, focus on hydropower. That reduces emissions quite significantly. We have been working well in this regard, to be honest. You have to give credit where credit is due. In solar, as I told you, almost or over half of our renewable energy now comes from solar. But there are other aspects attached to it. For example, to make solar energy requires solar panels. If you are creating solar panels in factories that are polluting the environment anyways, then your solar energy is also not that clean. Please understand, just because you are making solar doesn't mean it's clean, because you have to see how the solar panels are being built. Also, there's a cost attached to that. The problem with renewable is that you have to first think about storage solutions. You can make solar energy in the day, but you have to store it to use in the night. Now, you might say batteries will do it, but how many batteries will you build? At what scale? The batteries also will lead to a lot of pollution, and that is a problem that is not that easy to solve. Afforestation, again planting a lot more trees, a lot more plants, but that is a long-term process. It also requires land. Land is again a limited commodity that we have. With increasing population, increasing needs, increasing consumerism, it's very difficult to go through this path, but that also gives you a way to create a carbon sink. Then be more energy efficient. A lot of new buildings that are being built are buildings which are net zero. That is, the amount of energy they consume, almost that or more than that they actually produce. We have seen an increasing penetration in solar power panels around the country. A lot of people in their personal homes, houses, etc. have put solar panels on their rooftop. They are using the electricity generated either to, let's say, charge the electric car, or consuming it in the household, or excessive energy is also being sold to the government, and the government is happy to acquire that. When you buy electric appliances, you would have seen there is a star rating system, 1 star, 2 star, up to 5 stars. So if you buy an appliance which is, let's say, 5-star rated, that means it consumes much lesser energy as compared to a 1-star system. So the companies are being pushed to make appliances which are much more energy efficient. They are being pushed to make policies which are much more in line with the current requirement. Then, sustainable agriculture. See, agriculture is an integral part of a country like India. Huge population we have to provide food for them. Agriculture is also part of sustenance for a lot of people who are working as farmers, so you can't ignore that. But this is where you have to make important changes. The government, for example, is pushing the farmers towards cash crops, pulses, horticulture, rather than focusing so much on sugarcane or rice. But it's not that easy. To change a long-standing practice, to change the attitude of the farmers, push them to try something new is not going to be that easy, and this is where the government has to change and look into its policies very seriously. Related to greenhouse gas emission, the one big aspect of this problem is ozone depletion. Again, something that you would have read as a kid as well. Ozone is what protects us from harmful ultraviolet radiations. And we have seen that there have been some holes in ozone radiation, in ozone layer rather. The countries around the world came together to sign a treaty called the Montreal Protocol that led to banning of a lot of ozone depleting substances. So substances that led to depletion of ozone layer were banned. This is the only successful environmental treaty in the world, because Montreal Protocol actually led to the reversal of ozone damage. That shows that if the world really wants to come together and solve a problem, they have the capability to do that. But the question is, are they serious enough? Ozone depletion was a very, very dangerous thing. It still is. It depends on season to season. In some season, the ozone hole becomes larger. In some other season, it actually reduces its size. It has an impact on aquatic life. Again, with more radiation, increasing temperature, it can harm not just human life, increase the risk of problems such as skin cancer. It can even have an impact on aquatic life. Higher UV radiation level, as I told you earlier, has an impact on human health. There have been increasing cases of skin cancer. It has also led to buildup of chlorine and bromine compounds. The result is that a lot of substances are being banned now from being used in electronics, electrical components that were used earlier. All of this is a part of Montreal Protocol. Chlorofluorocarbons, for example, were banned because they were found to be depleting ozone. So the world has come together to stop this. This is a timeline of this, and I was talking about ozone depletion. It was 1987 when the Montreal Protocol came into being. The only successful treaty in terms of environment, because it has been able to achieve the goal that it set out for. The idea was to phase out ozone depleting substances like chlorofluorocarbons and other harmful chemicals. First, it led to reduction in chlorofluorocarbons, and then the result was a significant recovery in the ozone layer. And again, it's still ongoing. It's not that you have achieved the goal. As I said, it's not that ozone has been resurrected or it has been built completely. There are still certain holes that are in the ozone layer, and the size also increases or decreases depending on some seasons. But we have been able to a large extent, able to control that and able to ensure that the damage does not go out of our limit. Again, if nothing else, this is an example to show that if countries are really serious about solving a big problem, the problems are solvable. The question is, are you serious enough? Are you ready to accept this as your problem, or are you just willing to push it down the road for other countries to come and take some action? Now, while the Montreal Protocol was an international convention that saw multiple nations coming together and resolving a big problem, in India also, if you look at from India's perspective, there have been multiple initiatives taken. Some of them successful, some of them not so. Whenever you talk about any environment related initiative in India that has gained a lot of success and popularity, that has to be the Chipko movement. I'm sure all of you would have read about that at least once in your school. The Chipko movement was seen mainly in 1970s, starting from what you today call as Uttarakhand. There was a dense forest cover in that area where in the Tehri Garhwal region specifically, the government decided to cut down a lot of extremely old trees in order to have some development. The idea was that we will clean out the area and then we'll have housing, we'll have factories, etc. set up. And that angered the local population. The commercial logging operations began, so a lot of trees were being cut down, and the result was that the local population, especially the women, led a movement where they hugged the tree, making sure that no one would be able to force the women away and cut the trees. That has set a benchmark not just in India but around the world, a benchmark of community participation, where if a community takes up the matters in their own hand, they can actually stop the authorities also from going ahead and implement a policy that is against their environmental conservation practices. They led to the protection of forests, they led to protection of their trees, they led to all these related aspects in the nature, not just trees, the biodiversity that comes along with that, all that was protected just because the women here were brave enough to make sure that no one is allowed to lay their hands on these important trees. Now, if you look at the Chipko movement specifically, as I said, there have been very, very important movements that have a very important events that led to that movement. Starting with the international recognition. As I said, it's not just India, but the world over, the community realized the fact that this kind of a model can be adopted in other parts of the world. And it has been adopted in many other parts as well, where we have seen large scale community participation, where people have taken the matters in their own hands. And this again does not require you to have a lot of money, doesn't require you to have a lot of power. All it requires for the community to come together and have a will, a strong will to protect your environment, a strong will to protect the surroundings where you live in. And this was the result. In fact, the government of India realized this and they backtracked on their policy. This has been seen after that as well. The real Chipko movement may have started in 1970, but after that, whenever we have had any decision of the authorities to cut down trees, to undertake deforestation, we have seen many of these similar instances taking place. The famous one amongst them is what you call as the Mandal incident, where it all started and it grabbed a lot of media attention. Because for a lot of these initiatives from the community to be successful, an important role has to be played by media. Because think of it from this perspective. When the community takes up a project or when they take up an initiative to stop the government from doing what they want, the government will only feel pressured when the event is covered widely. Only when the media comes in, only when the people are talking about it in the entire country, only then the government realizes that maybe, just maybe they have made a mistake and maybe they take a step back. And this is where the media also plays an extremely, extremely important role. Now, realizing that issue and realizing the fact that we cannot randomly try and control pollution, the government of India has over the times formed pollution control board. So you would have heard of CPCB, that is a Central Pollution Control Board, an authority that works for the central government on controlling pollution. We also have state pollution control boards in respective state, keeping an eye on the respective state pollution. Now, if you see how it has emerged, 1974 is when CPCB, again, as I said, CPCB here stands for Central Pollution Control Board. Central Pollution Control Board. This is something that came up in 1974 and it does a bunch of things. It sets the standards for national water and air quality, means what should be the aspirational standard which we should aspire for. The sad part is that we have never been able to match up to that standard. For example, of air quality, we keep on talking about AQI time and time again, but we have never been able to match up to that standard. It also talks about monitoring air pollution level. It assesses air pollution in terms of different components, the PM 2.5, PM 10, etc. AQI readings, all of these are managed by Central Pollution Control Board. They also take up a lot of research and development. Now, how successful they have been in this area, you can decide that, you can take a call, but the reality is that one of their functions does include research and development as well. They try and make sure that the government and other authorities are advised in order to ensure that there is proper research and proper development taking place. If there is any new technology, for example, that will help us cutting down pollution, if there is any new policy that the government can introduce, they do advise the government. They also undertake guidance, technical assistance to state boards as well. So if a certain state board needs any kind of assistance, needs any kind of help from there, they will be the one to give this help to the state boards. All these are functions of CPCB. A lot of acts have also been passed, as you would have read about. There is something called the Water Act, the Air Act. All these acts have been passed specifically to control the levels of pollution in the country. And all these define the powers, the authority that the CPCB has. At the same time, whenever you talk about pollution, it is also important to have a discussion about what you call as sustainable development. Now, sustainable development is a phrase that you keep on hearing time and time again, not just in India but around the world. Sustainable development in simple terms means that your development patterns should not come at the cost of future. For example, if you have enough availability of water right now, let's say underground water, your usage pattern should not be about let me use all the water, let us not think about the future generations. No. You should try and use that much water so that you have left enough of it for the next generation and the generation after that. Because the earth, the resources that you have are not only for yours to use. There are generations that will come after you, there are people apart from you, they also have enough or they also have the same kind of right as you have. This is sustainable development. The problem is that this is where the entire world is lacking. In most of the cases, we are leaving Earth much worse than where we found it. Look at the average temperature of the Earth that is increasing, that is global warming that we discussed earlier as well. As compared to pre-industrial revolution era, the goal of the countries was not let the temperature increase by over 2 degrees Celsius. That ship has already sailed, by the way. There is absolutely nothing that the countries can do right now to stop that from happening. It's going even beyond that now, and this is where we have to come together. The phrase sustainable development was first introduced and discussed by a commission called the Brundtland Commission. They gave a report called Our Common Future. This is where they talked about a term called sustainable development. This is where they introduced the idea that unless the entire world understands the fact that our future or the future of the next generation is also in our hands, we will not be able to develop properly. There have been multiple UN conventions after that. There is a famous Earth Summit in Rio 1992. There was the Johannesburg Summit, the Paris Climate Deal Agreement. All of these have been introduced and discussed and signed by multiple countries to ensure that we work together on the ideas of what we call as sustainable development. But again, it's not that easy. You know, Mahatma Gandhi very famously said, the earth has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. When all of you are greedy and when you try and make use of as much resources as possible without thinking about leaving a lot of it for the next generation, this is where you go against the principles of sustainable development. And this is something which not just India, but the entire world is struggling against. Now, in sustainable development, these are the usual principles that you talk about. Let's understand them one by one. First, precautionary principle means rather than being prepared for what happens afterwards, take decisions to prevent harm. Over here, there are two very important words that you should know that are usually discussed in international community: mitigation and adaptation. What is the difference between the two? Mitigation are those techniques that help you stop a damage from happening. So let's say if you do something to stop climate change, if you do something to ensure that the average temperature does not increase any further, that will be called as mitigation. Adaptation, on the other hand, means that you accept the fact that whatever wrong has happened is irreversible now. You have to just try and live with it. Let me give you an example. So if countries around the world, for example, stop using coal, that is an example of mitigation, because you stop using coal with the hope that the temperatures will not increase further, the greenhouse gases will not be left in the atmosphere. On the other hand, if now you start saying that I will, let's say, start building houses on a taller building, or let's say at high altitude area, so that when the water level increases, my house is not submerged. That is adaptation. You are not stopping the water from rising. You are just taking steps to live with that now. That is adaptation. In an ideal world, mitigation should be good enough, but where we are right now, mitigation alone will not help us, and we are working on both fronts. The idea of sustainable development is to ensure that you are precautionary enough so that the situation does not become so bad that you have to now undertake this situation. There's also a problem of there's also a principle of integrated decision making, meaning that the decision making should be done keeping all aspects or all factors in mind. That is the economic aspect, the social aspect, the environmental factor. One important decision, for example, let's say the government of India, or any government for that matter, decides to give certain subsidies to factories just because the government thinks that it will lead to creation of more jobs. The factories, the manufacturers will have more money in their hand, they will expand their capabilities, they will employ more people, so on and so forth. Because of this, what we do is, we, let's say, ensure that the subsidies are given. But the problem is, with that decision, you are also pushing the companies to harm the environment. With more construction, with more activities, you will be ensuring cutting down of trees. You will be ensuring that all the pollution goes into the atmosphere. So the decision making cannot be just from the point of view of people getting jobs. As per sustainable development principle, the decision making has to be keeping all other related aspects in mind. Then the environmental protection, that is self-explanatory, that is a benchmark of sustainable development principles. Whatever you do, whatever decisions you are taking, they should not have a negative impact on the environment. The environment should be protected from any kind of harm as far as possible for you. Apart from this, one of the other important principles also include conservation of natural resources. As we discussed earlier, it is nature that makes crude oil, that makes coal, etc. So nature can do it again, but it does it at a very, very, very slow pace, much slower than the pace of consumption. So if you are consuming resources at a much faster pace as compared to the pace at which these are being developed, the result will always be that you will have to now be prepared for a situation wherein natural resources are running out. So you have to be mindful of the future generation and their requirement. So you have to ensure conservation of natural resources. Apart from that, intergenerational equity, as I told you earlier, think about future generations. Don't just think about yourself in a selfish manner. After 50 years, after 100 years, the people who come on the earth, would they also have a similar or better quality of life than you or not? That is your responsibility. Apart from that, be inclusive growth and poverty elevation means even in the present generation, amongst the people that are living, the fruits of development should be divided in such a manner that not just you, but others also in your vicinity get similar kind of benefits. A nation's development in the true sense will only be successful if the development benefits reach all across the society and not just the ones sitting at the top. All your decisions of today should also lead to poverty alleviation. The only number that the government usually is focused on in most countries is the GDP growth number. That can also give you a false sense of satisfaction. Because GDP growth does not always mean that the people at the lowest level also are developing. What if the growth is only coming in from the people sitting at the top? What if the people who are already rich and powerful are the ones who are being empowered even more? This is where all these principles of sustainable development have to be taken into consideration. Now, I'm sure all of you would have read about sustainable development goals. These are 17 goals, 17, that UN has asked the countries to try and achieve by 2030. Before that, UN used to have something called MDG, that is Millennium Development Goals. So Millennium Development Goals thing got over, then we followed it up with Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 of them, and I'll just show you all of these. Again, the aim for the countries is to achieve this by 2030. The problem with this is, none of these initiatives or what UN says is actually binding on the nations. So even if the government of India, let's say, does not achieve this goal, or not just government of India, any government, let's say, does not achieve this goal, there is not much that can be done by the government. There is not much that can be done by the UN. There is not much that any other country can do. So while these are goals that are good on paper, but whether the countries would be able to achieve those, or is there any action against those who don't achieve? No, nothing like that. Let's look at them one by one. So it's difficult, but my advice to all the serious aspirants would be to try and remember these. In the mains answer writing specifically, these can come in very handy. You can quote these. Like for example, SDG number 1 is no poverty. Now all of them also have their own sub goals. So I'm not asking you to go into those sub goals, but just to remember the headline ones. Number 1, no poverty. Number 2, zero hunger. Now please understand, hunger in international terminology, hunger does not mean lack of food. That is a very common mistake or a common misconception that we have. In the World Global Hunger Index, India usually has a very bad reputation. Why is that? Imagine a situation if you are locked inside a room for 3 months. Every single day, every single meal, you're only given rice to eat and nothing else. You will not die of hunger, you will not be starving. But as per this index, you will still be called as hungry. Why? Because this hunger is mainly about the nutrition that goes into your body. It is not about the quantity of food, it is about the nutritional value of the food, the nutritional aspect of the food. So, zero hunger also one of the aims, that is SDG number 2. Number 3, good health and well-being, self-sustainable, it's pretty self-explanatory. Quality education. India has done a good job with respect to right to education, which has consistently increased the enrollment ratio. The quality still has certain gaps. We have reports such as the UPSC report by Pratham, the annual survey of education report, that talks about how a lot of children, let's say in class 5, can't read grade 2 text. So the quality part we still have to work on, the quantity part we have been able to improve. Gender equality, again India does not have a great score here. Gender equality also is on different terms. For example, when it comes to political equality, India does pretty well. As in terms of politics, to fight elections, the right to vote, the right to participate in politics, there is no differentiation on the basis of gender. On the other hand, when it comes to economic equality, social equality, this is where we are lagging, just like many other developing countries. Then clean water sanitation, this is something we really have to work hard towards to achieve. Due to a lot of population, the slum areas where the sanitation facilities are absent, due to population, the rural areas where you would see the cleanliness or clean water availability is still not up to the mark. This is where the government has been lagging behind. Number 7, affordable and clean energy. This is where India has been focusing on renewable energy. We discussed this earlier as well. India aims to achieve a target of 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. We have crossed the 200 mark already. We are doing pretty well on solar. The government is betting heavily on green hydrogen now, but let's see how that turns out. Number 8 is decent work in economic growth. It is a part of directive principles as well. If you remember, in the directive principles as well, the government has been asked to ensure that there are decent working conditions available. The government, for example, has passed labor laws. There are multiple labor reforms underway. The working hours, the maximum working hours are fixed. There are talks about weekly offs, etc., the number of hours that you can work, the minimum age, labor laws, etc. Sustainable Development Goal number 9 is about industry, innovation, infrastructure. The government has been spending a lot on capital expenditure, building a lot of long-term assets. On the other hand, we can do better when it comes to research and development. Our spending on R&D is much lower than most countries. India's R&D spending, for example, right now is 0.7% of GDP, which is way below some of the countries against which we are competing for innovation. China spends close to 3% of its GDP. Their GDP anyways is much higher, and on that also 3% is spent. Countries like Israel and South Korea spend anywhere between 4 to 5% of their GDP on research and development. So this is where in innovation part, we have to work harder. Reduce inequalities, that's a problem with every country, not just India. Just like in other countries, the top 1% or top 10% people in the country control a majority of wealth. That has to be corrected. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. The government has been working on the smart cities mission, which unfortunately has not given the kind of results that the government would have hoped for. Climate action. India is doing well here, expanding a lot on solar energy. We have already announced that our net zero target is 2070. Major countries around the world want India to prepone that target. They want India to try and achieve that much before, but without any compulsion, we have taken 2070 as a target. Achieving that will depend on a lot of factors. Most importantly, it will also depend on whether or not we are able to get enough finances for that. Number 14 is life below water, something India has been working on. Fisheries sector is an important component of our exports. Frozen shrimp is something that we export in large numbers. Life on land, that is about biodiversity, that is sustainable development goal number 15. 16, peace and justice, strong institutions. Institutions such as judiciary, etc. should be strengthened, should be allowed to work independently. Countries should follow international law, something that India is proud to do. And number 17, partnership for the goals, means making sure that the countries globally are working together to achieve the global common goals. These are the 17 sustainable development goals. Again, the target is that this should be achieved by 2070, and these are just the headlines of it. So underneath this, there are specific goals. Like in health, etc., there are goals about infant mortality rate, how low should it go, maternal mortality rate, how low should it reach. So all these, the goals that you see, the 17 of them, there are sub parts of it, there are sub components of it that will be too difficult, too complex to remember, but you will read this later on in your environment classes. So you do have to try and remember at least some of them. Now, if you look at sustainable development, we talked about the principles. What exactly are the strategies? What is it that the nations can do and have been doing? First, have better environmental regulations. We do have that. For example, felling down of trees in the forest areas is banned. We also follow the polluter pays principle. So there are industries that are letting go of their industrial waste in water bodies like rivers, etc. They would have to compensate for that. They would have to pay for that. There are also non-conventional energy sources that we are focusing on. Nuclear, biogas, government has been focusing a lot on. If you would have remembered, the government recently launched the Govardhan scheme as well. The government wants to give a push to biogas plants. These can be set up at a lower cost. They can be set up in the rural areas as well. So something that is sustainable for the long run. Resource conservation, trying and make sure we only use the resources that are urgently required. Apart from that, public awareness, very, very, very important. Prime Minister of India a few years back initiated something called the Life Mission. Life Mission is about lifestyle for sustainable development. Under this mission, and this has been accepted by the UN as well now, the idea is that it is unfair for us or anyone to only expect big corporations, big companies to cut down their pollution. At the end of the day, the pollution, the contribution to pollution rather, is also made by those who are just private individuals like you and me in our day-to-day life. How we are traveling, how we are using energy, how much food are we consuming, that also has an impact on the environment. So the idea of Life Mission is that at an individual level also, if individuals take these small little decisions, make these minute changes in our lifestyle, that will also have a big impact. So not just expect big decisions, big changes to be done at the corporation, at the government level. Try and do that at an individual level as well. That is a Life Mission. Use of cleaner technologies. The government of India, as you know, has been working on green hydrogen mission. Recently, the government of India also has been now contemplating the idea of allowing FDI into nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plants that were exclusively being run by the government agencies. The government thinks that up to 49% if private participation from foreign comes in, that would be good. We would have better technology, so government is looking for cleaner technologies as well. Apart from that, international cooperation. The government of India realizes, as do other countries, that asking the countries to go towards cleaner energy requires a lot of money as well. This transition is not easy. This is where the developed countries have not been living up to their end of the bargain. They have not been committing and contributing enough funds to the international funds that have been created. You all would have read about something called the Loss and Damage Fund that came up in 2023. Loss and Damage Fund is again one of those many international funds that have been created with a hope that the developed world would contribute money here that can be distributed into those countries which are facing a lot of damages because of natural calamities. Something which can be traced back to climate change. But unfortunately, like other funds before this, here also, not a lot of money has come in. The government of India, in fact, has released its own green bonds as well to raise money from the market for environmental purposes. But those also have not been very successful because the interest rate offered on green bonds is not very high. So it's not attractive enough for the investor to put their money in the green bonds. The government also is pushing towards sustainable agriculture, trying to push the farmers away from water guzzling crops. I'll give you an example. Recently, the government started to educate the farmers about direct seeding of rice. This is just one example. So the usual way of growing rice is you have the seed, you plant it in a nursery. When it converts into a sapling, a little sapling, then you take that sampling and then you basically put that sampling into the ground. So it's a two-step process. First it is done in the nursery, then when the seed goes into sapling, the sapling comes into the ground. Then you basically use a lot of water. The field, the sapling has to be submerged in water for a long time. That uses a lot more water, that also emits methane. It's a longer process. So the government of India has come with a new technique called the direct seeding of rice, where, as the name suggests, it's a single step process. You directly take the seeds into the land and not first convert them into sapling. You don't even need to get your field submerged under water for a long time. That is also not required. It will use about 20% lesser water than earlier. The problem with this, however, is it requires a certain kind of soil that is able to retain moisture so that you don't require the land to be submerged underwater. This is just one example of what the government is trying to do by pushing the farmers towards better techniques, towards those areas where they would be able to make better decisions, and the agriculture itself will become far, far, far more sustainable. Now, having said that, there are obviously challenges associated with sustainable development. If there would not have been challenges, everyone would be doing it, right? The reason why many countries are not able to do that is because of challenges. First, poverty inequality. Think about a country like India that still has large-scale poverty. And if to give those people jobs, you have to set up factories no matter what. As a government, what decision will you take? Will you just allow the trees to grow because you think, no, they are important for the environment, or would you decide to cut down the trees so that factories can be set up there and people can get jobs? That is a big problem. When it comes to taking a decision between environmental conservation and elevation of poverty, this is where the governments usually struggle. And the government usually, in the national interest and in the interest of obviously their voters, etc., would have to take a call in favor of poverty elevation. There's a problem of resource scarcity, especially in a country like India. See, the problem with the world is it's not fairly divided. Like, India has about 17% of the world's population right now, but it doesn't have 17% of the world's resources. Like, for example, 17% of world's population is in India, but we have only 4% of the world's fresh water. There would obviously be a problem of resource scarcity. Same is the issue with land. Just because we have 17% of the world's population doesn't mean we have the 17% land of the world. So when you are scarce with your resources, you have to then maximize using whatever you have in the interest of your population. And that would obviously sometimes go against the principles of sustainable development. There are also problems of technological constraints. It's very easy to say, oh, why don't we use solar energy? Why don't we use wind energy? But it's not that easy. Where will you store all that solar energy that you are generating to be used later? Now, before you say battery, making a battery or making so many batteries is not feasible. How many batteries will you create to store so much solar energy? And while creating those batteries, aren't you harming the environment altogether once again? And if you are, then what is the purpose? There is no point then you are anyways affecting the environment negatively. So there are technological constraints to it as well. It's not that just because you have discovered green hydrogen as a good fuel, you can just use it from tomorrow onwards. It requires a lot of research, it requires a lot more technology, a lot more technological investment. There are also issues of financial constraint. Look at India, as I told you earlier, we have been struggling with raising funds for environmental conservation. The green bonds have not been able to give the kind of results. Loss and damage fund, before that, all these funds that have been created at the international level, none of them have been able to meet their target. Most of them have a target that about $100 billion will be contributed in that fund by developed world, but none of the developed countries have been able to live up to the promise. In no single year has any of these funds gotten the $100 billion mark that they had hoped for. There are issues of climate change. It is threatening agriculture because of erratic weather conditions. You do see rainfall that is in excess to what the usual pattern is, or in certain situations you also see deficit in rainfall, that is you see droughts. So the problem is that when you have to sustain your population, sustain the livelihood, it becomes a challenge for the government. There are also issues of policy implementation. Just because the government has made a policy doesn't really mean that it will automatically be converted on the ground. Making a policy is easy because you have to sit in the room, just decide everything on paper. But when you implement it, that is when it starts impacting real lives of the people. And this is when you have to take the community into confidence, everyone, all the stakeholders into confidence, so that eventually the policy becomes a success. Now, apart from that, just a second. Yeah. One other very important parameter here with respect to sustainable development is the idea of what you call as common but differentiated responsibility. Now, it's very interesting. Around the world, there is a big debate between the nations who is responsible for climate change. Which country is it, or which countries is it that should pay for it? Now, it is world accepted without any doubt that the climate change issue started after Industrial Revolution. There's no doubt about that. The Industrial Revolution is the problem. So who led to Industrial Revolution? Who led to using of these heavy machines, tools and coal, etc.? It was a developed world. So there is no doubt about that. It is a developed world that kept on using it indiscriminately for 200 years that led to climate change. The second part of the problem is now who should take action. Developed world wants everyone to take action. For example, developed countries want that every country should stop burning coal. Every country should stop using whatever is harming the environment. But this is the problem. The developing country like India, we say that now it is our turn to become developed. When you were becoming developed, we did not say anything. It is because of your development aspirations that the world is facing this global climate issue problem. Now, if you want the environment to really be clean, you compensate and you stop using coal. You give us the money from all the money that you have earned from your development. This is what India and other developing countries say. And this is what starts the idea of, or this is what has led to the idea of common but differentiated responsibility. So the idea is simple. Number one, it is everyone's responsibility. So no country can say, it is not my responsibility, I will not do anything. It is a common responsibility of anyone. Every country has to take some action, has to take certain steps in order to stop climate change, number one. Second, however, the responsibility is not the same, it is differentiated. Meaning that India's responsibility will not be the same as America's responsibility. America was the one that did all the pollution, so why should we stop using coal or why should we pay for it? While India should shoulder some responsibility, or the developing countries should shoulder some responsibility, it cannot be the same as the developed world. This is what we understand as the idea of common but differentiated responsibility. So is it everyone's responsibility? Yes. But should everyone do the same thing or should everyone work as hard as other? Not exactly. It is a developed world that have to bear the burden and pay for what the developing countries call as transitioning into cleaner fuel. And you will see this in most of the UN convention, most of climate change talks, the targets that are given to nations are different. Developed countries are given a much harder target. So developed countries, for example, will have to phase out harmful substances almost immediately. While for the developing countries, they do get some amount of time, they do get much more time to phase it out. This is the idea of common but differentiated responsibility. These are the principles of this idea. First, have equity in action means not equality, not forcing every country to do the same, expecting every country to participate, not with the same measure, but whatever is possible as per their level. That is why every country is free to decide their own nationally determined contributions. In the Paris Climate Summit, every country made their own goals. Similarly, every country decides their own net zero year. Our net zero year is 2070. China's is 2060. Some other countries have done it at 2050. Similarly, the contributions or the commitment should be flexible. As I said earlier, the countries are free to decide their own targets. Just because America wants a certain target doesn't mean India has to be forced to adopt it. There has to be global cooperation. If, for example, a country has developed certain technology to store solar energy in a better way, if a country has developed certain techniques that can help everyone else transition towards cleaner energy, then share it with everyone. Don't just restrict it to yourself, share it with everyone so that there is much better global cooperation. There should be free flow of green energy, free flow of all these techniques, free flow of capital if it is meant to transition to a cleaner world and a much more sustainable future. This is what brings us to the end of chapter number 7. A lot of these things will be studied and discussed in a lot more detail when you read about environment later on. We'll see you in the next chapter very soon. My name is Harshmeet Singh. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.